Wonder. First day jitters. Okay, so I admit that the first day of school, I was so nervous that the butterflies in my stomach were more like pigeons flying around my insides. Mom and dad were probably a little nervous too, but they acted all excited for me, taking pictures of me and Via before we left the house since it was Via's first day of school too. Up until a few days before, we still weren't sure I would be going to school at all. After my tour of the school, mom and dad had reversed sides on whether I should go. Mom was now the one saying I shouldn't, and Dad was saying I should. Dad had told me he was really proud of how I'd handled myself with Julian and that I was turning into quite the strong man. And I heard him tell Mom that he was now thought she had been right all along. But Mom, I could tell, wasn't so sure anymore. When Dad told her that he and Via wanted to walk me to school today too, since it was on the way to the subway station, Mom seemed relieved that we would all be going together. And I guess I was too. Even though Beecher Prep is just a few blocks from our house, I've only been on that block a couple of times before. In general, I try to avoid blocks where there are lots of kids roaming around. On our block, everyone knows me and I know everybody. I know every brick and every tree trunk and every crack in the sidewalk. I know Mrs. Grimaldi, the lady who's always sitting by her window, and the guy who walks up and down the street whistling like a bird. I know the deli on the corner where Mom gets our bagels and the waitress at the coffee shop, who all call me honey and give me lollipops whenever they see me. Love my neighborhood of North River Heights, which is why it was so strange to be walking down these blocks feeling like it was new to me. Amesford Avenue, a street I've been down a million times, looked totally different for some reason. Full of people I never saw before, waiting for buses, pushing strollers. We crossed Amesfort and turned up Heights Place. Via walked next to me like she usually does, and Mom and Dad were behind us. As soon as we turned the corner, we saw all the kids in front of the school. Hundreds of them, talking to each other in little groups, laughing or standing with their parents who were talking with other parents. I kept my head down. Everyone's just as nervous as you are, said Via in my ear. Just remember that this is everyone's first day, okay? Mr. Tishman was greeting students and parents in front of the school. I have to admit, so far nothing bad has happened. I didn't catch anyone staring or even noticing. Only once did I look up to see some girls looking my way and whispering with their hands cupped over their mouths, but they looked away when they saw me. We reached the front entrance. Okay, so this is it, big boy, said Dad, putting his hands on top of my shoulders. Have a great first day. I love you, said Via, giving me a big hug and a kiss. You too, I said. I love you, Augie, said Dad, hugging me. Bye. Then Mom hugged me, but I could tell she was about to cry, which had totally embarrassed me, so I just gave her a fast, hard hug, turned, and disappeared into the school. Locks. I'd gone straight to room 301 on the third floor. Now I was glad I'd gone to that little tour because I knew exactly where to go and didn't have to look up once. I noticed that some kids were definitely staring at me now. I did my thing of pretending not to notice. I went inside the classroom and the teacher was writing on the chalkboard while all the kids started writing at different desks. The desks were in a half circle facing the chalkboard, so I chose the desk in the middle toward the back where I thought I would make it harder for anyone to stare. I still kept my head way down, just looking up enough from under my bangs to see everyone's feet. As the desk started to fill up, I did notice that no one sat next to me. A couple of times, someone was about to sit next to me, then changed his or her mind at the last minute and sat somewhere else. Hey, August. It was Charlotte giving me her little wave as she sat down at a desk in front of the class. Why anyone would choose to sit at the front, I don't know. Hey, I said, nodding hello. Then I noticed Julian was sitting a few seats away from her, talking to some other kids. I know he saw me, but he didn't say hello. Suddenly, someone was sitting down next to me. It was Jack Will. Jack, what's up? He said, nodding at me. Hey, Jack, I answered, waving my hand, which I immediately wished I hadn't done because it felt uncool. Okay, kids, everybody settle down, said the teacher, now facing us. She had written her name, Miss Petosa, on the chalkboard. Everybody find a seat, please. Come in, she said to a couple kids who had just walked in the room. There's a seat right there and there. She hadn't noticed me yet. Now, the first thing I want everyone to do is stop talking and she noticed me. Put your backpacks down and quiet down. She had only hesitated for a millionth of a second, but I could tell the moment she saw me. Like I said, I'm used to it now. I'm going to take attendance and do the seating chart, she continued, sitting on the edge of her desk. Next to her were 3 neat rows of accordion folders. When I call your name, come up and I'll hand you a folder with your name on it. It contains your class schedule and your combination lock, which you should not try to open until I tell you to. Your locker number is written on the class schedule. Be forewarned that some lockers are not right outside of class, but down the hall. And before anyone thinks of asking, no, you can't switch lockers and you can't switch locks. If there's time at the end of the period, we're all going to go get to know each other a little better, okay? She picked up the clipboard on her desk and started reading the names out loud. Okay, so Julian Albans, she said, looking up. Julian raised his hand and said, here, at the same time. Hi, Julian, she said, making a note on her seating chart. She picked up the very first folder and held it out toward him. Come pick it up, she said, kind of no nonsense. He got up and took it from her. Hemina Shin. She handed a folder to each kid as she read off the names. As she went down the list, I noticed that the seat next to me was the only one still empty, even though there were two kids sitting at one desk just a few seats away. When she called the name of one of them, a big kid named Henry Joplin, who had already looked like a teenager, she said, Henry, there's an empty desk over there. Why don't you take that seat? She handed him his folder and pointed to the desk next to mine. Although I didn't look at him, I could tell Henry did not want to move next to me, just by the way he dragged his backpack on the floor as he came over, like he was moving in slow motion. Then he plopped his backpack high on the right side of the desk, so it was kind of like a wall between his desk and mine. Maya Markowitz, Miss Petosa was saying. Here, said a girl about 4 desks down from me. Miles Norrie? Here, said the kid who had been sitting with Henry Joplin. As he walked back to his desk, I saw him shoot Henry a poor you look. August Pullman, said Miss Petosa. Here, I said quietly, raising my hand a bit. Hi, August, she said, smiling at me very nicely when I went out to get my folder. I kind of felt everyone's eyes burning into my back for the first few seconds I stood up in front of the class, and everybody looked down when I walked back to my desk. I resisted spinning the combination when I sat down, even though everyone else was doing it, because she had specifically told us not to. I was also pretty good at opening locks anyway, because I've used them on my bike. Henry kept trying to open his lock, but couldn't do it. Miss Petosa called out the next few names. The last name was Jack Will. After she handed Jack his folder, she said, okay, so write your combinations down somewhere safe you won't forget. But if you do forget, which happens at least 3.2 times per semester, Mrs. Garcia has a list of the combination numbers. Now go ahead, take your locks out of your folders and spend a couple of minutes practicing how to use them, though I know some of you went ahead and did that anyway. She was looking at Henry when she said that. And in the meanwhile, I'll tell you a little something about myself, and then you guys can tell me a little something about yourselves, and we'll get to know each other. Sounds good? Good. She smiled at everyone, though I felt like she was smiling at me the most. It wasn't a shiny smile like Mrs. Garcia's, but a normal smile, like she meant it. She looked very different from what I thought teachers were going to look like. I guess I thought she'd look like Miss Fowl from Jimmy Neutron, an old lady with a big bun on top of her head. But in fact, she looked exactly like Amon Mothma from Star Wars Episode 6, haircut kind like a boy's, and a big white skirt kind of like a tunic. She turned around and started writing on the chalkboard. Henry still couldn't get his lock open, and he was getting more and more frustrated every time someone else popped one open. He got really annoyed when I was able to open mine on the first try. The funny thing is, if he hadn't put the backpack between us, I most definitely would have offered to help him. Around the room, Miss Petosa told us a little bit about who she was. It was boring stuff about where she originally came from and how she wanted to teach, and she left her job on Wall Street about 6 years ago to pursue her dream and teach kids. She ended by asking if anyone had questions, and Julian raised his hand. Yes, she had to look at the list to remember his name. Julian. That's cool about how you're pursuing your dream, he said. Thank you. You're welcome, he smiled proudly. Okay, so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Julian? Actually, here's what I want everyone to do. Think of 2 things you want people to know about you. Actually, wait a minute. How many of you came from the beach or lower school? About half raised their hand. Okay, so a few of you already know each other, but the rest of you, I guess, are new to school, right? So everyone think of 2 things you want other people to know about you. And if you know some of the other kids, try to think of things they don't already know about you. Okay? Okay, let's get started with Julian and we'll go around the room. Julian scrunched up his face and started tapping his forehead like he was really thinking hard. Okay, whenever you're ready, Miss Petosa said. Okay, so number 1 is that. Do me a favor and start with your names, okay? Miss Petosa interrupted. It'll help me remember everyone. Oh, okay. So, my name is Julian, and the number one thing I'd like to tell everyone about myself is that I just got Battleground Mystic for my Wii, and it's totally awesome. And the number two thing is we got a ping pong table this summer. Very nice. I love ping pong, said Miss Petosa. Does anyone have a question for Julian? Is Battleground Mystic multiplayer or one player? Asked the kid named Miles. Not those kinds of questions, guys, said Mrs. Petosa. Okay, so how about you? She pointed to Charlotte, probably because her desk was closest to the front. Oh, sure. Charlotte didn't hesitate even for a second, like she knew exactly what she wanted to say. My name is Charlotte. I have two sisters, and we just got a new puppy named Suki in July. We got her from an animal shelter, and she's so cute. That's great, Charlotte. Thank you, said Miss Petosa. Okay, then, who's next? Like a lamb to the slaughter, something that you say when someone who goes somewhere calmly, not knowing that something unpleasant is going to happen to them. Suddenly, it was my turn to talk. My name is August, I said, and yeah, I kind of mumbled it. What? Said someone. Can you speak up, honey? Said Miss Petosa. My name is August, I said louder, forcing myself to look up. I have a sister named Via and a dog named Daisy, and that's it. Wonderful, said Miss Petosa. Anyone have questions for August? No one said anything. Okay, you're next, said Miss Petosa to Jack. Wait, I have a question for August, said Julian, raising his hand. Why do you have that tiny braid in the back of your hair? Is like that a Padawan thing? Yeah, I shrugged, nodded. What's a Padawan thing? Said Miss Petosa, smiling at me. It's from Star Wars, answered Julian. A Padawan is a Jedi apprentice. Oh, interesting, answered Miss Petosa, looking at me. So, are you into Star Wars, August? I guess. I nodded, not looking up, because what I really wanted to do was just slide under the desk. Who's your favorite character? Julian asked. I started thinking maybe he wasn't so bad. Jango Fett. What about Darth Sidious? He said. Do you like him? Okay, guys, you can talk about Star Wars stuff at recess, said Miss Petosa cheerfully, but let's keep going. We haven't heard from you yet, she said to Jack. Now it was Jack's turn to talk, but I admit I didn't hear a word he said. Maybe no one got the Darth Sidious thing, and maybe Julian didn't mean anything, but in Star Wars Episode 3, Darth Sidious' face gets burned by Sith lightning and becomes totally deformed. His skin gets all shriveled up and his face kind of melts. I peeked at Julian and he was looking at me. Yeah, he knew what he was saying. Choose kind. There was a lot of shuffling around when the bell rang and everyone got up to leave. I checked my schedule and it said my next class was English, room 321. I didn't stop to see if anyone else from my home room was going my way. I just zoomed out of class and down the hall and sat down as far from the front as possible. The teacher, a really tall man with a yellow beard, was writing on the chalkboard. Kids came in laughing and talking in little groups, but I didn't look up. Basically, the same thing happened in homeroom, happened again. No one sat next to me except for Jack, who was joking around with some kids who weren't in our homeroom. I could tell Jack was the kind of kid other kids like. He had a lot of friends. He made people laugh. When the second bell rang, everyone got quieter and the teacher turned around and faced us. He said his name was Mr. Brown, and then he started talking about what we'd be doing in this semester. At a certain point, somewhere between A Wrinkle in Time and Shen of the Sea, he noticed me but kept right on talking. I was mostly doodling in my notebook while he talked, but every once in a while I would sneak a look at other students. Charlotte was in this class, so were Julian and Henry. Miles wasn't. Mr. Brown had written on the chalkboard in big block letters Preceppt. Okay, everyone, write this down at the very top of the first page in your English notebook. As we did what he told us to do, he said, Okay, so who can tell me what a precept is? Does anyone know? No one raised their hands. Mr. Brown smiled and nodded and turned to write on the chalkboard again. Precepts equal rules about really important things. Like a motto, someone called out. Like a motto, said Mr. Brown, nodding as he continued writing on the board. Like a famous quote, like a line from a fortune cookie. Any saying or ground rule that can motivate you. Basically, a precept is anything that helps guide us when making decisions about really important things. He wrote down on the chalkboard and then turned around and faced us. So, what are some really important things? He asked us. A few kids raised their hand and he pointed at them. They gave their answers, which he wrote on the chalkboard in really, really sloppy handwriting. Rules, schoolwork, homework. What else? He said, as he wrote, not even turning around. Just call things out. He wrote everything everyone called out: family, parents, pets. One girl called out the environment. He wrote on the chalkboard and added, our world. Sharks, because they eat things in the ocean, said one of the boys, a kid named Reed, and Mr. Brown wrote sharks. Bees, seatbelts, recycling, friends. Okay, said Mr. Brown, writing all those things down. He turned around when he finished writing to face us. But no one's named the most important thing of all. We all looked at him. Without saying anything else, he wrote down who we are. Who we are, he said, underlining each word as he said it. Who we are. Us, right? What kind of people are we? What kind of person are you? Isn't that the most important thing of all? Isn't that the kind of question we should be asking ourselves all the time? What kind of person am I? Did anyone happen to notice the plaque next to the door of the school? Anyone read what it says? Anyone? He looked around, but no one knew the answer. It says, "Know thyself," he said, smiling and nodding, "and learning who you are is what you're here to do." I thought we were here to learn English, Jack cracked, which made everyone laugh. Oh, yeah, and that too, Mr. Brown answered, which I thought was very cool of him. He turned around and wrote in big, huge block letters that spread all the way across the chalkboard, Mr. Brown's September precept. When given the choice between being right or being kind, choose kinds. Okay, so everyone, he said, facing us, I want you to start a brand new section in your notebook and call it Mr. Brown's Precepts. He kept talking as we did what he was telling us to do. Put today's date at the top of the first page, and from now on, at the beginning of every month, I'm going to write a new Mr. Brown precept on the chalkboard, and you're going to write it down in your notebooks. Then we're going to discuss that precept and what it means. And at the end of the month, you're going to write an essay about it, about what it means to you. So by the end of the year, you'll have your own list of precepts to take away with you. Over the summer, I asked all my students to come up with their very own personal precept, write it on a postcard, and mail it to me from wherever you go on summer vacation. People really do that? Said one girl whose name I didn't know. Oh, yeah, he answered. People really do that. I've had students send me new precepts years after they graduated from this school, actually. It's pretty amazing. He paused and stroked his beard. But anyway, next summer seems like a long way off. I know, he joked, which made us laugh. So everybody relax a little bit while I take attendance, and then when we're finished with that, I'll start telling you about the fun stuff we're going to be doing this year in English. He pointed to Jack when he said this, which was also funny, so we laughed. As I wrote down Mr. Brown's precept, I suddenly realized I was going to like school, no matter what.